My name is Roger Thompson, 34 years old, and I never thought the man who raised me since I was 6 would become a stranger in death. Dad always said family transcends blood, but at his funeral, my stepbrother Jake proved those were just empty words. 28 years of memories erased in an instant when he claimed everything, declaring I was never really family. Walking away that day with nothing but photographs felt like surrender. But sometimes letting go becomes your greatest power. If you think this story ends with that funeral, you might be surprised by what happened 3 months later. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family, betrayal, and unexpected justice. I barely remember my biological father. He left my mom Sarah and me when I was 4, disappearing into the night with vague promises to call that never materialized. Mom worked 2 jobs to keep our small apartment, often leaving me with a neighbor after school. She was exhausted but determined, her smile a permanent fixture despite the heavy bags under her eyes. I was 6 when she met William Thompson, or Bill as everyone called him. He came into the hardware store where she worked part-time looking for supplies to fix a leaky roof. Mom always laughed when telling this story, saying he kept returning for unnecessary items just to talk to her. Their first date was at a family restaurant where I was included, Bill insisting I should be there. Rather than ignoring me like other men Mom dated, he asked about my favorite dinosaurs and actually listened to my rambling answers. Trust didn't come easily to me. My young mind had already learned men leave, so I kept my distance at first. Bill seemed to understand, without explanation, never pushing too hard. Instead, he earned my trust gradually through fishing trips where he taught me to bait a hook, and baseball games where he bought me my first glove. He celebrated my small victories at school and showed up at my first grade play with flowers for both Mom and me. When they married 2 years later, Bill asked me to be his best man. I stood proudly in my miniature tuxedo, holding the rings on a small pillow, feeling important and included. During the ceremony, Bill knelt down to my level, adding a special promise to me in his vows. Roger, I promise to be the father you deserve, to guide you, support you, and love you as my own son, now and always. I remember the applause from the guests and how Mom cried happy tears. It was after the wedding I first met Jake, Bill's 9-year-old son from his previous marriage. Jake lived primarily with his mother across town, but spent every other weekend with us. He was friendly initially, sharing his video games and showing me his baseball card collection. We built forts in the backyard and stayed up late watching movies. Bill probably shouldn't have let us see. In those early days, we truly felt like brothers. Bill never distinguished between us. Our birthdays received equal celebration. Our achievements the same proud father response. When Jake started calling my mom Sarah, instead of just my mom's name, Bill beamed with pride at our blending family. For several years, everything seemed perfect in our new home. The shift began subtly during our teenage years. Jake grew increasingly resentful of my relationship with Bill. I noticed it first when I made the high school baseball team as a freshman. While Bill cheered enthusiastically at games, Jake would sit sullen and distant in the bleachers. Bill coached my little league team, but had to miss Jake's soccer games due to scheduling conflicts. Small inequalities in time and attention that weren't intentional began to fester. When I was 16, Jake, then 19, made the first cutting remark that revealed his true feelings. After Bill praised my report card at dinner, Jake pushed away from the table muttering, "Of course the golden boy gets all the attention." The awkward silence that followed made it clear this wasn't a new thought for him. Bill tried addressing it later, but Jake dismissed the conversation with practiced indifference. College highlighted our diverging paths. I attended State University on a partial academic scholarship, with Bill and Mom covering the remainder. They never missed Parents' Weekend, driving 4 hours each way to visit. Jake dropped out of community college after 1 semester, cycling through jobs and apartments. Bill always offered help, financial and otherwise, but Jake accepted money while rejecting advice. My graduation day stands out in memory. Bill cried when I received my engineering degree, later telling everyone at the celebration dinner how proud he was of his son. Jake had promised to come but texted an excuse about car trouble at the last minute. We later saw social media posts of him at a concert that same day. After college, I secured a job at a respected engineering firm in our hometown, allowing Sunday dinners to become our tradition. Bill and I maintained our fishing trips, conversations deepening as I entered adulthood. He shared wisdom about his construction business, marriage, and life lessons. These moments solidified our bond beyond any biological connection. Meanwhile, Jake appeared sporadically, usually when financial troubles loomed. Bill never turned him away, always providing what he needed while gently encouraging more stability. Jake would accept the help with minimal gratitude, often not returning calls for weeks afterward. Mom worried about the pattern, but Bill insisted on remaining available for both his sons, regardless of the response. Our family faced its first major crisis when Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. Bill became her tireless caretaker, attending every appointment and managing her medications with devoted precision. I visited daily, but Jake appeared only twice during her 6-month battle. When she passed, Bill seemed to age overnight. His robust frame suddenly diminished by grief. A year later, Bill received his own devastating diagnosis: advanced heart disease requiring significant lifestyle changes and medication. Without hesitation, I moved into an apartment 10 minutes from their house to help care for him. My firm allowed flexible hours so I could drive him to appointments and manage his increasingly complex medical needs. During this time, Jake's visits remained sporadic despite Bill's deteriorating health. Occasional phone calls ended with promises to visit that rarely materialized. Bill never complained, always making excuses for his absence. Hess busy with his new job, or the drive is too far with gas prices these days. I bit my tongue to avoid upsetting him. The strangest shift occurred in Bill's final 2 months. Jake suddenly began appearing weekly, often when I was at work. Bill seemed both pleased and confused by the renewed attention. I returned one day to find them huddled at the kitchen table, with papers scattered between them, the conversation halting abruptly at my entrance. Jake quickly gathered the documents, mentioning something about helping Dad organize his affairs. Bill's energy continued declining, but he insisted I maintain my work schedule. "You can't put your whole life on hold for an old man," he'd say, though I would have gladly done exactly that. During one of our final conversations, he squeezed my hand with surprising strength and said, "There's papers in the blue box, Roger. Remember that." Before I could ask for clarification, he drifted to sleep, the medication making him increasingly drowsy. The end came suddenly. I had left for 30 minutes to pick up his prescription refill. When I returned, I found him unresponsive in his favorite recliner, the television still playing his beloved Western movie. The paramedics arrived quickly but could only confirm what I already knew. William Thompson, the only real father I'd ever known, was gone. In those first hours of grief, I couldn't process the enormity of the loss. The man who taught me to fish, to change a tire, to treat people with respect, to love unconditionally, had vanished from my life. As I made the necessary calls, including to Jake, I clung to the memories of Bill telling me I was his son in every way that mattered. Those words would soon be tested in ways I never imagined. The 3 days between Bill's death and funeral passed in a blur of arrangements and paperwork. The funeral home needed decisions about caskets, flowers, and service details. Bill's church pastor needed information for the eulogy. Relatives called constantly with questions I barely had answers for. Through it all, Jake remained notably absent, not returning calls and sending only a brief text. Handling some important business. Be there for the service. I selected Bill's favorite Navy suit for burial, the one he wore to my college graduation. I chose music he loved and photos spanning his life, including many with Mom and me. Each decision felt like honoring a piece of him while simultaneously accepting he was truly gone. The weight of responsibility kept me functioning when grief threatened to overwhelm me. The morning of the funeral dawned with appropriate gloom, gray clouds hanging low, as if nature itself mourned Bill's passing. I arrived early to greet family members traveling from out of state, many I hadn't seen in years. Bill's sister Aunt Linda hugged me tightly, whispering how much her brother had adored me. Uncle Frank, Bill's older brother, clasped my shoulder with tears in his eyes, telling me Bill always bragged about his brilliant engineer son. Jake arrived 20 minutes after the scheduled start time, dressed in what appeared to be a new designer suit, accompanied by a man carrying a leather briefcase whom I didn't recognize. Jake nodded curtly in my direction before taking a seat in the front row that I'd saved for family. The stranger sat beside him, whispering occasionally in Jake's ear. Their late entrance and whispered conversation drew attention, but the pastor mercifully began the service, redirecting focus to the reason we had gathered. When my turn came to deliver the eulogy, my voice initially faltered. Looking out at the packed church, I saw the impact of Bill's life reflected in the tear-streaked faces. I spoke about Bill's unwavering integrity, his generosity to everyone he encountered, and his definition of family that transcended blood relations. My dad wasn't my biological father, I said, but he chose to be my father in every moment that mattered. He showed me that family is built through daily choices to love, not just DNA. Throughout my speech, I noticed Jake fidgeting, checking his watch repeatedly. The man beside him scribbled notes occasionally, his expression professionally neutral. Their behavior felt jarringly out of place amid the genuine grief surrounding them, but I focused on completing my tribute to Bill. After the church service, everyone gathered at Bill's house, our family home, for the reception. The dining room table overflowed with casseroles and desserts brought by neighbors and church members. People shared stories about Bill, his generosity with tools and expertise, his volunteer work building wheelchair ramps for elderly residents, his famous Christmas light displays that drew visitors from surrounding towns. Each story reinforced what I already knew. My father had been a truly good man. As the afternoon progressed, guests gradually departed until only close family and a few friends remained. Jake, who had been engaged in hushed conversation with his companion in the corner, suddenly cleared his throat loudly. "Now that it's just family," he announced. "Though several of Mom's relatives and Bill's friends were still present, there's some business we need to address." The room fell uncomfortably silent as Jake gestured to the man beside him. "This is Mr. Wilson, Dad's attorney. He has some important information to share." Mr. Wilson placed his briefcase on the coffee table and extracted several official-looking documents. "I'm sorry to discuss such matters on this difficult day," he began, though his tone lacked genuine empathy. "But as the executor of William Thompson's estate, Jacob needs to begin the process immediately." I stepped forward, confusion evident on my face. "Executor? I wasn't aware of any of this." Jake smirked slightly. "That's because Dad updated his will 2 months ago. He named me executor and primary beneficiary of his estate." The words hit like a physical blow. 2 months ago coincided exactly with Jake's sudden reappearance in Bill's life. "Mr. Wilson continued in his monotone voice, reading portions of a document that sounded nothing like Bill's wishes as I'd understood them. Furthermore, he read, "As my biological son, Jacob Thompson shall inherit the family home, all business assets of Thompson Construction, and all remaining financial accounts and investments. Non-blood relatives are expressly excluded from inheritance." The room erupted in murmurs. Aunt Linda gasped audibly, while Uncle Frank stood up, his face reddening. "That doesn't sound like Bill at all," he protested. "Roger was as much his son as Jake was, maybe more so in recent years." Mr. Wilson simply adjusted his glasses. "The document is legally binding, signed and witnessed according to state law. Mr. Thompson was of sound mind when he made these decisions." Jake stepped forward, jangling a set of keys. "These are for the house. You'll need your set back, Roger." His voice carried no trace of grief or compassion, only a cold efficiency. "But this is my home too," I said, still processing the shock. "I grew up here. All my memories with Mom and Bill are here." "Not legally," Jake countered. "Dad adopted me. You were just Mom's kid that he helped raise. The house goes to his real family." Uncle Frank moved toward Jake angrily. "You listen here. I was there when Bill married Sarah. I heard the vows he made to Roger. He considered that boy his son in every way that matters." Jake shrugged dismissively. "Feelings don't change legal facts. Blood is blood. Roger isn't family. Never was." The words carved through me like a knife. Not family. Never was. 28 years of love and connection dismissed in a single cruel sentence. I looked around at the shocked faces of relatives and friends who had witnessed our family life, now witnessing its destruction. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat. Additionally, all personal belongings in the home belong to the estate unless specifically designated otherwise, which there were no such designations. So I get nothing, I asked, my voice hollow. Not even photographs or mementos? You can take your personal clothing and items you can prove you purchased, Jake said with chilling precision. Everything else stays, and I'd appreciate if you could remove your things within the week. I'm planning renovations. Someone gasped at the coldness of this statement. Bill's body barely in the ground, and Jake already planning to erase his presence from the home. I felt dizzy, the room spinning slightly as the magnitude of the betrayal sank in. Did Dad know you were doing this? I managed to ask. Jake smiled thinly. It was his idea. He finally recognized who his real family was. Blood matters in the end. I knew Bill well enough to recognize the lie, but exhaustion and grief overwhelmed my ability to fight. Watching Jake's triumphant expression as he stood in Bill's house, wearing an expensive suit likely purchased with Bill's money, I felt something break inside me. Not just heartbreak, but a fundamental shift in how I viewed family and trust. Aunt Linda approached, wrapping her arm around my shoulders. This isn't right, Roger. Bill would never have wanted this. But her words, though kind, couldn't change the legal documents or the keys Jake now held to the only stable home I'd ever known. As distant relatives whispered and stared, I recognized I was facing this new, unexpected loss entirely alone. That night, I couldn't bear returning to my apartment, a space suddenly feeling foreign in the wake of such loss. Instead, I reclined the seat in my car, parked at a scenic overlook where Bill and I sometimes stopped after fishing trips. Sleep evaded me as my mind replayed Jake's words repeatedly. Not family, never was. The casual cruelty of the statement collided with decades of memories where Bill had treated me as his son. Morning found me disheveled and disoriented. My phone displayed dozens of missed calls and messages from concerned friends and relatives, but I couldn't summon the energy to respond. Physical symptoms of grief manifested intensely, my stomach rejecting food and my thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. The combined loss of Bill and my family identity created a disorientation so profound I called in sick to work for the first time in years. After a shower and change of clothes at my apartment, I made an appointment with Patricia Sanchez, an attorney recommended by a colleague. Her office, modest but professional, provided a neutral space to process the events. I recounted the funeral scene, Jake's announcement, and my suspicions about the timing of the will change. Patricia listened intently, making occasional notes. When I finished, she sighed deeply before speaking. Based on what you've described, there's definitely grounds to contest this will. The timing of the changes, your father's declining health, and the dramatic shift from his previous expressed intentions all suggest potential undue influence. What does that mean exactly? I asked, legal terminology foreign to my engineering mind. It means if Jake pressured your father while he was vulnerable, medicated, or not fully understanding the consequences, the court might invalidate the will. Bill's history of treating you as his son for nearly 3 decades would support your case. Did he ever discuss his intentions with you directly? I thought about Bill's final weeks, his increasingly confused state, and the mysterious comment about papers in a blue box. Not specifically about inheritance, but he always talked about providing for both of us equally. And there was something strange he mentioned near the end about papers in a blue box, but I didn't understand what he meant. She made another note. That could be significant. We should look into that. The other thing to understand is that contesting a will can be expensive and time-consuming. These cases often take a year or more, and legal fees can be substantial. And they're emotionally draining, Roger. Family members testifying against each other, private matters becoming public record, relationship dynamics scrutinized by strangers. Her words painted a picture of a lengthy battle that would keep Bill's death and the family fracture at the center of my life for months or even years. I imagined courtrooms and depositions, Jake and I unable to even look at each other, Bill's memory becoming entangled with legal arguments and accusations. How likely would I be to win? I asked. Patricia gave me a measured look. It's impossible to predict with certainty. If we can prove Jake manipulated your father while he was medicated and confused, you have a strong case. If we find this blue box with papers that contradict the new will, even stronger. But these cases are always complicated, and judges are reluctant to overrule explicit written directives without compelling evidence. I thanked her and promised to consider my options, the weight of the decision heavy on my already burdened shoulders. Driving aimlessly afterward, I found myself at the cemetery where Wed buried Bill beside Mom. The fresh mound of earth marked his resting place. The temporary marker, a poor substitute for the permanent headstone not yet installed. Sitting on the damp grass, I spoke aloud as if he could hear me. "What happened, Dad? Did Jake pressure you when you were sick? Or did you really believe blood matters more than everything we shared?" The questions hung unanswered in the quiet cemetery air. I remembered Bill's frequent sayings about family. "Family doesn't fight over stuff, Roger. Things are just things. It's the memories and love that matter." Head repeated this when helping neighbors through contentious divorces, or when mediating disputes between relatives. The idea of engaging in a prolonged legal battle over his possessions seemed to contradict everything Head taught me. A strange clarity began to emerge as clouds parted overhead. Whatever had happened with the will, whether Jake had manipulated Bill or not, fighting for material possessions would mean allowing bitterness to dictate my future. It would mean keeping Bill's death an open wound rather than beginning to heal. Most importantly, it would mean honoring Jake's definition of family as determined by blood rather than Bill's lifetime definition of family as determined by love. Standing up, I brushed grass from my jeans and placed a hand on Bill's temporary marker. "I won't fight him for stuff, Dad. That's not what you taught me, but I won't let him take my memories or the lessons you gave me either. Those are mine regardless of DNA." The decision crystallized fully. I would walk away from the inheritance battle but take with me the true legacy Bill had left, the values, memories, and love Head shown me throughout my life. With surprising steadiness, I drove to the house to collect the few personal items I was permitted to take. Jake was already there, directing workers who were removing furniture and rearranging room. The family photos that once lined the hallway had been taken down, boxes stacked where Bill's favorite reading chair had stood. The house was physically the same, but spiritually unrecognizable. "I'm just here for my personal things," I announced, refusing to show the pain Jake clearly wanted to witness. Jake gestured dismissively toward the stairs. "Your old room still has some of your junk in it. Take it and go." I moved through the house that had been my home for most of my life, now feeling like an intruder. In my old bedroom, now partially emptied, I carefully selected photographs of Bill, Mom, and me from various points in our life together. Sports trophies Bill had proudly displayed, birthday cards Head saved, the fishing lure Wed used on my first successful catch. These small treasures had no monetary value but held the essence of our relationship. As I descended the stairs with a single box of memories, Jake stood in the entryway, watching with barely concealed satisfaction. His new watch glinted in the light, the kind of luxury purchase Bill would have considered wastefully extravagant. "I want you to know," I said with surprising calm, "that you can have everything. The house, the business, all of it. I don't need to fight you for things to know what Dad meant to me and what I meant to him." Jake snorted derisively. "How noble. You're only saying that because you know you'd lose in court." "Fine, I'll give it up," I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "But don't ever contact me again. Whatever connection we had as brothers ended today." He laughed, the sound echoing harshly in the half-empty foyer. "As if I would. We're not brothers. Never were." I placed my house key on the table beside the door. Next to it, I set the watch Bill had given me for my college graduation, inscribed with his favorite saying, "Character builds the man." It felt right leaving it behind, a final acknowledgement that material objects, even sentimental ones, were ultimately just things. "Goodbye, Jake," I said simply, walking past him toward my car. "Enjoy your empty apartment and meaningless job," he called after me. "I'll be enjoying Dad's legacy." I didn't respond or look back, loading my small box of memories into my car and driving away from the only real home he'd known. The mixture of emotions was complex grief for Bill, betrayal from Jake, but also a strange lightness from choosing to walk away rather than fight. That first night alone in my apartment, brought the full weight of solitude. No more Sunday dinners with Bill. No more impromptu visits to help with household repairs. No more shared holiday traditions. The emptiness felt cavernous. Yet, beneath the sorrow lay something unexpected, a sense of having honored Bill's true values by refusing to fight over possessions. In walking away, I'd chosen to embody the man Head raised me to be. Sleep finally came, dreamless and deep, the first step in a healing process I couldn't yet envision but had somehow begun. 3 months passed in a fog of work and measured healing. I threw myself into engineering projects, requesting additional responsibilities that kept me at the office late and occupied my thoughts. Weekends were filled with home improvement tasks in my apartment, the physical labor providing temporary distraction from the empty spaces in my life. Friends invited me to dinners and events, concerned about my isolation, but respectful of my need for space. Several relatives from Bill's side of the family had reached out, expressing outrage at Jake's actions and offering support. Uncle Frank called weekly, checking on me and sharing stories about Bill from their childhood. These connections provided comfort while reinforcing the truth I clung to. Family transcended blood regardless of legal documents. I avoided discussions about the inheritance whenever possible. When colleagues or acquaintances inevitably asked about Bill's estate, I deflected with vague comments about things being handled. The wound remained too raw to expose to casual conversation, the betrayal too personal to dissect publicly. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my office phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Answering automatically, I was surprised to hear Margaret Dawson's voice. As Bill's executive secretary for 15 years at Thompson Construction, she'd been a fixture at company events and occasional family gatherings. "Roger, I need to see you," she said without preamble. "It's important, about your father." "Margaret's not really any news to discuss," I replied, protective instincts flaring. Jake inherited everything. The company, the house, all of it. "Not everything," she said cryptically. "This isn't something I can discuss on the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow after work? Carmen's Cafe on Elm Street?" Curiosity overcame reluctance. 5:30? Perfect. And Roger, come alone. The following day, anticipation made concentrating on work nearly impossible. Margaret had always been proper and professional, not given to dramatics or gossip. Her insistence on meeting suggested something significant. Carmen's Cafe was a small establishment several miles from the Thompson construction offices, an unlikely spot for running into company employees. Margaret had already secured a corner table, a cup of tea steaming before her. At 62, she maintained the precise appearance and alert posture that had made her an invaluable gatekeeper for Bill's business dealings. After brief greetings and ordering coffee, I asked directly, "What's this about, Margaret?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I've been wrestling with this decision for months, Roger. Loyalty to the company, to your father's memory, and to what's right has kept me awake nights." She adjusted her glasses nervously. 2 weeks before your father died, I witnessed something deeply troubling." She described entering Bill's office with quarterly reports to find Jake pressuring him to sign documents while Bill was visibly disoriented from his heart medication. "Your father could barely hold the pen, Roger. His hands were shaking, and his eyes couldn't focus. Jake kept saying it was just routine paperwork that couldn't wait. When I offered to come back later when Bill felt better, Jake nearly pushed me out of the office. My stomach tightened at the image of Bill vulnerable and manipulated. Did you see what the papers were? Not clearly, but they had legal letterhead I didn't recognize, not the company's usual firm. After that day, Jake started coming to the office regularly, always timing his visits when you were at your job. He'd close the door with Bill for hours, and your father seemed increasingly confused afterward." She paused, sipping her tea with a trembling hand. "There's something else. The blue metal box your father kept in his office safe." I straightened immediately. He mentioned papers in a blue box right before he died. I never understood what he meant. Margaret nodded. "Bill kept his most important documents in that box, locked in the office safe. Only he and I knew the combination for emergency purposes. The day after the funeral, I went to the office to collect my personal items since Jake had already announced he'd be selling the company. The safe was open and empty. The blue box was gone. "Jake must have taken it," I said, pieces beginning to connect. That's what I thought initially, Margaret continued. But last week, while clearing out my desk, I found a note from your father dated 3 weeks before his death. She withdrew a folded paper from her purse and slid it across the table. In Bill's familiar handwriting, slightly more unsteady than usual, were instructions to move the blue box to the old safe behind the painting in his private office bathroom if anything happened to him. Only Margaret and Bill knew about this secondary safe. Installed years earlier when the company handled particularly valuable contracts. Is the box still there? I asked, hope rising unbidden. I checked yesterday when Jake was at a client meeting. It's there, untouched. She wrote a series of numbers on a napkin. That's the combination. I think whatever is in that box was meant for you, Roger. My mind raced with possibilities and concerns. If Jake finds out, Hez rarely at the office, preferring to work from home or meet clients elsewhere. The cleaning crew comes Mondays and Thursdays. Wednesday evening, the building will be empty after 6. She reached across the table, gripping my hand with surprising strength. Your father was a good man who loved you deeply. Whatever happened at the end wasn't what he wanted. I'm certain of that. Sleep eluded me that night, my thoughts circling around Bill's final message and the mysterious blue box. Had he somehow anticipated Jake's manipulation, created a contingency plan, or was I grasping at false hope to ease the pain of his loss and betrayal? Wednesday evening found me parking several blocks from Thompson Construction, anxiety pulsing through me as I walked toward the familiar building. Margaret had left the side entrance unlocked as promised, the security system temporarily disabled for what Shed told the monitoring company was routine maintenance. The offices felt eerily quiet, my footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. Bill's private office at the end of the hallway stood untouched, his name still on the door despite Jake's takeover. Inside, family photos still adorned the credenza behind his desk, including several of me that Jake had apparently overlooked or ignored. The room smelled faintly of Bill's cologne, a sensory reminder so powerful I had to pause to collect myself. Following Margaret's instructions, I entered the small private bathroom adjacent to the office. Behind a generic landscape painting hung on the back wall was a small wall safe, expertly concealed in the building's original construction. With trembling fingers, I entered the combination Margaret had provided, hearing a satisfying click as the mechanism released. Inside sat a weathered blue metal box, approximately the size of a thick textbook. I carried it reverently to Bill's desk, setting it down on the polished wood surface where Head conducted business for decades. The simple key lock yielded to gentle pressure, clearly left unlocked intentionally. Inside, I found several envelopes, a USB drive, and legal documents bound with a blue ribbon. The topmost envelope bore my name in Bill's handwriting. Opening it with care, I began to read, My dear son Roger, if you're reading this, then my fears have been realized, and Jake has acted as I suspected he might. First and foremost, know that you are and have always been my son in every way that matters. The joy and pride you've brought me throughout your life have been my greatest treasure. In recent weeks, as my health deteriorated, I've noticed Jake behaving strangely, insisting on private conversations about my will and the business. Hez brought a new attorney around, not Harold Peterson, who've trusted for 20 years. The medication makes my thinking foggy sometimes, and am worried about what I'm being asked to sign. I've created this contingency plan with Harold's help. The USB drive contains recordings of conversations with Jake where Hez pressured me about changing my will. Harold suggested I record these interactions given my concerns. The legal documents establish a trust in your name containing ownership shares of Thompson Construction and provisions for the house. These documents were executed months ago when my mind was clear, with proper witnesses and legal oversight. I've asked Margaret to ensure you find this if necessary. She has been a loyal friend as well as employee and knows my true wishes. The final envelope contains contact information for Harold Peterson, who has copies of everything contained here. Whatever happens, remember that legacy isn't measured in possessions or money, but in the values we live by and pass on. You've exemplified those values throughout your life, and nothing can take away the fact that you are my son, my greatest accomplishment, and the one who truly understands what matters. With eternal love, Dad. Tears flowed freely as Bill's voice seemed to fill the room through his written words. The validation that my instincts had been correct, that Bill had never intended to exclude me, provided both vindication and renewed grief for what Jake had stolen from us both. With shaking hands, I connected the USB drive to Bill's computer. Video files appeared, dated over the final 2 months of his life. In the first recording, Jake loomed over Bill's hospital bed, papers in hand, his voice insistent as Bill appeared sedated and confused. Subsequent recordings showed similar scenes in Bill's home office and bedroom, each showing increasingly aggressive tactics as Bill weakly protested or asked questions Jake deflected. The legal documents confirmed what Bill's letter stated: a separate trust established 8 months earlier, when Bill was still relatively healthy, designating me as primary beneficiary of his business interests and the family home. The trust had been structured specifically to withstand challenges, with medical evaluations confirming Bill's mental competence at the time of signing. The final envelope contained Harold Peterson's business card with a handwritten note: "Call anytime. Everything is prepared." Also included was a detailed account from Bill documenting his concerns about Jake's behavior, specific incidents of pressure and manipulation, and his fear that he was being coerced into changing his long-standing plans for his estate. As I carefully repacked the box, a complex mixture of emotions washed over me. Relief that Bill's true intentions aligned with our relationship. Sadness that Head spent his final weeks worried and manipulated. Anger at Jake's calculated betrayal. And a renewed connection to Bill himself, his foresight and care extending beyond death to protect me. Leaving the office with the blue box securely in hand, I felt Bill's presence more strongly than at any point since his death. Head found a way to speak truth from beyond the grave, providing not just material legacy, but the far more valuable gift of confirming our bond. Despite Jake's cruel words at the funeral, I had been family. I had always been family. The following morning, I called Harold Peterson from Bill's letter. His receptionist, hearing my name, immediately put me through, suggesting Bill had indeed prepared him for this possibility. "Roger," Harold's deep voice resonated through the phone. "I'm relieved you finally called. I've been concerned since the funeral but couldn't legally reach out to you directly without proof you'd found Bill's contingency materials. We arranged to meet that afternoon at his downtown office, a space considerably more distinguished than the strip mall location of Jake's chosen attorney." Harold, in his mid-60s with silver hair and penetrating eyes, greeted me with a firm handshake and genuine warmth. After reviewing the contents of the blue box together, Harold explained the legal situation with practiced clarity. "The trust your father established is separate from the will Jake presented. It's what we call an irrevocable trust, meaning once established, it couldn't be changed even by Bill himself without your consent as the beneficiary. He structured it this way specifically to protect against the scenario that unfortunately occurred." "So, the house and business actually belong to the trust, not to Jake?" I asked, trying to understand the implications. Harold nodded. "Correct. Bill transferred those assets to the trust 8 months ago, with proper legal documentation and witnesses. The trust then granted him lifetime usage rights, but ownership had already legally transferred. The documents Jake had your father sign would have been ineffective regarding those specific assets because Bill no longer technically owned them to give away. Why didn't you come forward at the funeral when Jake made his announcement?" Harold sighed heavily. "Ethically and legally, I couldn't disclose the trust without direct communication from you as the beneficiary. Bill established very specific protocols to protect your privacy and his arrangements. He was concerned about Jake's reaction if he learned of the trust prematurely. The evidence of Jake's manipulation was substantial. The recorded conversations clearly showed him pressuring Bill while heavily medicated, making false statements about legal requirements, and dismissing Bill's repeated questions about Roger's inheritance. Medical records confirmed Bill was on high doses of pain medication during the period when the new will was allegedly signed, calling into question his capacity to make informed decisions. "What happens now?" I asked, still processing the reversal of fortune. "We filed documents with the court immediately to assert the trust's claims and invalidate the fraudulent will. Given the evidence, particularly the video recordings and medical records, the case is exceptionally strong. I should warn you, though, that Jake has already begun liquidating assets. Harold showed me financial records indicating Jake had sold company equipment, transferred funds from business accounts to personal ones, and taken out a home equity line of credit against the family house. Hess spent substantial sums on luxury purchases, a sports car, a vacation property in the mountains, and numerous high-end items. The knowledge that Jake had so quickly begun dismantling Bill's life's work for personal indulgence strengthened my resolve. Do whatever it takes to stop him from causing more damage. The legal process moved with surprising speed, given the clear evidence. Within days, temporary injunctions prevented Jake from selling more assets or making additional large purchases. A court date was set for 3 weeks later, a timeline Harold described as lightning fast in legal terms, thanks to the compelling evidence. Jake's reaction came swiftly in the form of a late-night phone call, his voice alternating between threatening and pleading. "You have no right to do this, Roger. Dad wanted me to have everything. He told me so. The recordings show otherwise, Jake. He was confused and medicated when you pressured him. Those recordings are taken out of context," he shouted. "I'll counter-sue for defamation. I'll drag this out for years. You'll spend everything on legal fees." When threats didn't work, his tone shifted dramatically. "Look, we can work something out. Split things 50-50. There's no need for courts and lawyers. You told me I wasn't family," I reminded him calmly. "You said I was never Bill's son. Those weren't words about money, Jake. They were about erasing my entire relationship with him. There's no splitting that 50-50. "Don't be so sensitive," he scoffed. "It was just talk in the heat of the moment. Of course you're family. Please direct all further communication to Harold Peterson," I said, ending the call despite his continued protests. The courtroom on the day of the hearing felt unnecessarily formal for what Harold had described as an open and shut case. Jake sat with his attorney, both in expensive suits that contrasted with the increasingly desperate look in Jake's eyes. Several family members attended, including Uncle Frank and Aunt Linda, offering silent support from the gallery. The proceedings moved methodically through the evidence. Medical experts testified about Bill's diminished capacity during the period in question. The recordings played in the hushed courtroom, Jake's voice echoing as he pressured a clearly confused Bill. Documentation of the trust established months earlier was presented, along with witnesses who confirmed Bill's clear intention to provide equally for both sons. Jake's defense crumbled under examination. His attorney attempted to argue Bill had changed his mind legitimately, but couldn't explain why he'd chosen a new lawyer after 20 years with Harold, or why no medical professional had evaluated his capacity before the signing. The financial evidence of Jake's immediate spending spree further damaged his credibility regarding his concern for Bill's legacy. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened attentively throughout before delivering her ruling. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds clear and convincing proof of undue influence and diminished capacity. The will dated 2 months prior to William Thompson's death is hereby invalidated. The trust established 8 months prior to his death, naming Roger Thompson as beneficiary, is confirmed as the controlling legal document regarding the assets in question. She looked directly at Jake, her disapproval evident. Furthermore, the court orders a full accounting of all assets removed or sold from the estate since William Thompson's death, with appropriate restitution to be determined at a follow-up hearing. The evidence presented regarding potential elder abuse and fraud will be referred to the district attorney's office for review and possible criminal charges. Jake's face drained of color at the mention of criminal charges. His attorney immediately began whispering urgently in his ear as the judge concluded the session. I sat motionless, relief and vindication washing over me in equal measure. As we exited the courtroom, several family members approached with tearful embraces. "Bill would be so proud of how you've handled this," Aunt Linda whispered. "You fought for the truth, not just the things." Uncle Frank was more direct. "I knew something was fishy at that funeral. Bill's rolling over in his grave seeing what Jake tried to pull." Beyond the family circle, I noticed several Thompson construction employees attended the hearing, including Margaret, whose testimony about witnessing Jake's pressure tactics had proven crucial. Their presence reinforced the broader impact of Bill's life and legacy beyond our immediate family. Jake attempted to approach as I spoke with Harold near the courthouse steps, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "This isn't over," he said, his voice lacking the confidence it had carried at the funeral. "Ill appeal." Harold stepped between us professionally. "Mr. Thompson, all communications should go through proper legal channels, and I should advise you that pursuing further litigation with the evidence on record would likely be considered frivolous and could result in additional sanctions." As Jake stalked away, I felt strangely empty of the satisfaction it anticipated. The legal victory, while necessary, couldn't restore the relationship with the brother Id once had, or erase the painful words spoken at the funeral. Most importantly, it couldn't bring Bill back to see justice done. The media had picked up on the case, with its elements of family drama and elder abuse making for compelling headlines. Several reporters approached as we left the courthouse, but I declined comment beyond a brief statement Harold had prepared acknowledging the court's decision and asking for privacy as our family healed. The aftermath brought practical challenges as well as emotional ones. Determining which of Jake's purchases could be recovered, assessing the state of the business after months of his mismanagement, and reclaiming the family home all required time and legal assistance. Yet beneath the logistical complications lay a deeper sense of vindication, not merely about possessions, but about the truth of my relationship with Bill having been legally recognized and affirmed. As Harold had predicted, the district attorney's office took the evidence of elder abuse seriously. Jake would face additional legal consequences beyond losing the inheritance Head schemed to obtain. The system that had initially failed to protect Bill was now working to establish justice, however delayed. Walking away from the courthouse, I realized that while the legal battle had been necessary, the greater victory lay in knowing Bill's true intentions and love had found a way to transcend even death. Head planned carefully to protect not just his material legacy, but the truth of our relationship. A final act of fatherly love that spoke volumes about what family truly meant to him. 6 months after the courthouse victory, I stood in the driveway of the family home, keys in hand, finally ready to cross the threshold as its legal owner. The legal processes had moved deliberately, each step necessary to unwind Jake's damages and restore Bill's intentions. Now, on a crisp autumn day, similar to when Bill and I had often raked leaves together, I prepared to reclaim the space that held our family memories. The house stood solid and familiar from the outside. Bill's carefully maintained flower beds now overgrown but still showing the structure Head created. Inside told a different story. Jake had begun aggressive renovations, walls partially demolished in the living room, fixtures removed from bathrooms, and Bill's carefully crafted built-in bookshelves ripped out, the materials discarded in a dumpster out back. The destruction felt personal, an attempt to erase Bill's presence from the physical space Wedge shared. Family photos had been removed from walls, leaving discolored rectangles on the paint as ghostly reminders. Bill's collection of Western novels, lovingly accumulated over decades, was nowhere to be found. The reading chair, where Head taught me to tie fishing flies, had been replaced with an ostentatious leather recliner, still bearing its price tag. Most painful was Bill's home office, the space where Head reviewed my homework, taught me to balance a checkbook, and shared wisdom about navigating adulthood. Jake had converted it to a gaming room, expensive equipment scattered across what had been Bill's antique desk, empty beer bottles and fast food containers, suggesting his stewardship had been as careless as it was disrespectful. The cleanup process became both practical necessity and emotional therapy. With help from Uncle Frank and several of Bill's longtime friends, I sorted through the chaos, salvaging what remained of our family history, while planning thoughtful restoration of the spaces Jake had damaged. Each nail hammered and each wall repainted became an act of reclaiming not just physical space, but the memories and legacy Jake had attempted to erase. In Bill's bedroom closet, overlooked by Jake's hasty renovations, I discovered a cardboard box containing personal journals spanning decades. Bill's private thoughts, recorded faithfully in his methodical handwriting, provided unexpected connection across time. He documented his initial meetings with my mother, his growing love for the serious little boy with trust issues, and his pride in the man he'd become. These writings became nightly reading, each entry restoring pieces of our shared history Jake had nearly destroyed. The journals revealed dimensions of Bill Id never fully appreciated: his private doubts about his parenting, his concerns over Jake's increasingly materialistic values, his quiet pride in my engineering career that he rarely expressed directly. Most poignantly, he documented his growing awareness of Jake's true character, writing just months before his death. I worry about what Jake might become without proper guidance. Roger has internalized the values I tried to teach, but Jake seems to view relationships as transactions. Money and possessions hold too much power over him. Thompson Construction presented different challenges. Jake's brief tenure had left the company financially strained, with missed deadlines, alienated clients, and demoralized employees. Margaret had remained as a steadying influence, preventing complete collapse, but unable to counteract Jake's impulsive decisions and absence of construction knowledge. My engineering background provided technical understanding, but not the management experience necessary to run a construction company. After careful consideration, I decided to take an active leadership role rather than selling the business. Bill's lifetime achievement deserved continuity. I hired an experienced construction manager while focusing my own efforts on client relationships and strategic direction, a partnership that gradually stabilized operations. The employees shared stories about Bill Id, never heard his anonymous payments for a worker's son's medical treatment, holiday bonuses delivered personally during difficult years, and the second chances he'd given to those struggling with personal challenges. Through their experiences, I discovered a dimension of Bill that extended beyond our family life. His role as mentor and sometimes father figure to dozens of employees Wad found in him not just a boss, but a model of integrity. While exploring Bill's office at the company headquarters, I discovered documentation of community projects he'd funded, without publicity: a wheelchair ramp program for elderly residents, scholarship funds for children of employees, and regular contributions to the food bank, where my mother had once received assistance during our hardest times. This pattern of quiet generosity reflected Bill's deepest values. Help should be given without expectation of recognition or return. Following Bill's example, I continued these initiatives, expanding some and adding new ones that addressed current community needs. A training program for at-risk youth interested in construction trades became particularly successful, providing paths to stable careers for teenagers without clear direction, similar to how Bill had mentored me through uncertain times. As practical matters stabilized, the emotional landscape began shifting as well. With justice secured and Bill's legacy protected, genuine grief finally found space to exist without the complicating factors of betrayal and legal battles. I visited the cemetery regularly, updating Bill on company developments and home renovations in one-sided conversations that nonetheless provided comfort and continuity. Family relationships evolved in the aftermath of the court case. Most of Bill's relatives, initially shocked by Jake's actions, reintegrated into my life through holiday gatherings and regular communication. Aunt Linda began a Sunday dinner tradition reminiscent of the meals Bill and I had shared, creating new rituals to replace those that had been lost. These connections, based on choice rather than obligation, reinforced Bill's lifetime message about family transcending blood. Nearly a year after Bill's death, Uncle Frank called with unexpected news. Jake was facing criminal charges unrelated to our case. Investigations into his financial dealings had uncovered multiple instances of fraud, including fabricated investment schemes targeting elderly clients. The pattern of exploitation extended far beyond his manipulation of Bill, suggesting a fundamental character flaw rather than an isolated moral failure. Your father always worried about Jake's relationship with money, Uncle Frank reflected during the call. He tried to teach him that character matters more than possessions, but some lessons can't be forced on someone who isn't willing to learn. The observation echoed Bill's journal entries and highlighted the stark contrast between the values he'd successfully passed to me and those Jake had rejected. Despite sharing Bill's DNA, Jake had never embraced the principles that defined Bill's life, creating a hollow inheritance regardless of material wealth. As the one-year anniversary of Bill's death approached, I organized a memorial service focused on celebration rather than mourning. The gathering would bring together family, friends, employees, and community members who had been touched by Bill's life, a tribute to the expansive impact Ted had beyond our immediate family circle. In preparing for the event, I reflected on the turbulent years since his passing. The journey from devastating loss, through betrayal to eventual justice, had transformed me in ways I was still discovering. Walking away that day at the funeral, though initially feeling like defeat, had been the first step toward honoring Bill's true legacy, living with integrity regardless of circumstances. The quiet voice that had guided me to surrender material claims for the sake of dignity had been Bill's influence continuing beyond his death. That same voice had later supported pursuing justice, not for vengeance, but for truth. Throughout the process, Bill's values had remained my compass, helping navigate complications Ted never anticipated but had nonetheless prepared me to face. The memorial service, marking 1 year since Bill's passing, brought together people from every aspect of his life. Thompson construction employees stood alongside church members, neighbors, beside distant relatives, all united by connection to a man who'd touched their lives through consistent kindness and integrity. We'd gathered in the community center Bill had helped renovate years earlier, its sturdy structure a fitting metaphor for the foundation Ted built in so many lives. Photos spanning Bill's life adorned the walls, including many featuring our family vacations, fishing trips, and ordinary moments made extraordinary through the lens of memory. When my turn came to speak, I approached the podium with a calm certainty that contrasted sharply with my emotional eulogy a year before. My father wasn't perfect, I began, but he was perfectly consistent in his values. He believed character outlasts possessions, integrity matters more than success, and family is created through love rather than defined by DNA. These principles guided his life and continue guiding mine. I shared stories of Bill's quiet generosity, his patient mentoring, and his unfailing belief in second chances. I announced the William Thompson Memorial Scholarship for Stepchildren and Blended Families, a program funded through the trust Ted established. Dad understood that family comes in many forms, I explained. This scholarship honors his belief that love, not biology, creates true family bonds. After the formal program concluded, attendees shared memories in small groups, laughter mixing with occasional tears as Bill's life was celebrated in all its dimensions. The gathering had the feeling of healing, of wounds closed if not completely forgotten, of a community acknowledging loss while recognizing the ongoing impact of a life well lived. As the crowd thinned, I stepped outside for fresh air, noticing a solitary figure standing near the parking lot. Despite the year that had passed, I recognized Jake immediately, though his appearance had altered dramatically. Gone were the expensive clothes and confident posture, replaced by a department store suit that hung loosely on his thinner frame. His face showed the strain of legal troubles and public disgrace. Our eyes met across the distance, neither of us moving initially. The last time we'd been in the same space was the courthouse, separated by attorneys and legal proceedings. Now, on the anniversary of Bill's death, no such barriers existed between us. Jake approached hesitantly, stopping several feet away. "I wasn't planning to come," he said, his voice lacking its former arrogance. "Didn't think it'd be welcome, but I wanted to pay respects to Dad." The term "Dad" sounded strange coming from him after his cruel declaration at the funeral that blood defined family. I remained silent, allowing him to continue. "The DA offered a plea deal," he said, looking at the ground rather than meeting my eyes. "He'll serve some time, but not as much as I might have. Turns out fraud across state lines carries serious consequences." "I heard," I replied neutrally. "I keep thinking about what Dad would say if he could see me now." Jake shook his head slowly. The golden son he was always so proud of, headed to prison. The biological son who threw away everything he tried to teach me. The bitterness in his voice had a different quality now, directed inward rather than at me. For the first time, I glimpsed something beneath Jake's manipulative exterior, genuine regret, if not full remorse. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. "What I did to you, to Dad's memory, it's not something an apology fixes, but for whatever it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for who I became. for thinking inheritance meant stuff instead of who Dad really was. The words hung between us, imperfect, but seemingly sincere. The anger Id carried, while justified, suddenly felt heavy and unnecessary. Not because Jake deserved forgiveness, but because continuing to carry resentment contradicted everything Bill had taught about focusing on what matters. Dad once told me, I said finally, that the most valuable things he hoped to leave us couldn't be put in a will: honesty, integrity, compassion, the courage to admit mistakes and try to fix them. I studied Jake's face, searching for signs of the stepbrother Id once known before greed consumed him. Those are still available to you, Jake. That inheritance can't be stolen or lost. Sounds like Dad, Jake said, a ghost of a smile briefly crossing his face, always more concerned with who we were than what we had. That's his real legacy, I replied. Dad's legacy wasn't his money or property, it was his character. That's something you couldn't steal, and I couldn't lose, regardless of legal documents. Jake nodded slowly. You got that part of him. I missed it somehow. Always focused on the wrong things. We stood in silence for several moments, the gulf between us still vast, but somehow less impassable than before. No single conversation could repair the damage done, yet acknowledging truth created a foundation that hadn't existed previously. When do you begin your sentence? I asked finally. 6 weeks. Enough time to get my affairs in order, such as they are. He hesitated before adding, would it be completely inappropriate to ask if we could talk again before then? Not about money or property, just about Dad, maybe. Things I should have asked him while he was here. The request surprised me, as did my willingness to consider it. I can't promise anything beyond coffee and conversation, I said cautiously. Trust is earned over time, Jake. It doesn't reset automatically. That's fair, more than fair, considering everything. He extended his hand tentatively. Thank you for not turning me away today. As we shook hands briefly, I recognized this wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation or a complete redemption story. Jake would face consequences for his actions, and our relationship would require boundaries and time if it were to heal at all. Yet Bill's voice seemed to whisper approval at even this small step toward repair rather than continued destruction. Returning to the memorial gathering, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. Losing Bill had created a void nothing could fill, yet his influence continued shaping my choices and values. The painful process of losing and reclaiming his material legacy had ultimately reinforced the true inheritance, had left the principles by which he lived, and the love had freely given. The construction company was thriving again under thoughtful leadership. The family home once more contained warmth and memories rather than conflict. The community projects Bill had quietly supported continued improving lives. In every meaningful sense, his legacy remained intact and growing despite the temporary disruption Jake had caused. Most surprisingly, walking away that day at the funeral, what had felt like my greatest defeat had actually been the moment I most embodied Bill's values. By refusing to fight over possessions, Id demonstrated understanding of his lifelong message that character matters more than things. That choice, painful as it was, had initiated the journey that eventually led to both justice and healing. As the memorial concluded and I thanked the last departing guests, a profound sense of peace settled over me. Bill was gone, yet the best parts of him lived on through the lives Head touched and the values Head instilled. The legal victory had secured his material legacy, but the true inheritance had never been at risk. It had always resided in the lessons, love, and character he had built in me over 28 years of daily choices to be my father. Have you ever experienced a situation where walking away from conflict ultimately led to a better resolution than fighting would have? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the strongest choice isn't the most obvious one, as Roger discovered in this story. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this message about true inheritance being character, not possessions. Thank you for listening, and remember that family is created through love, not defined by DNA.